Probably my favorite movie of all time is Inception, the 2010 Leonardo DiCaprio film with the dreams within dreams within dreams. And the plot of that movie is a tangled web if there ever was one. You have to take it nice and slow, understand things one piece at a time, and once you understand all the smaller parts, you can put it all together and you can finally understand what is going on. You might need to watch it a few times to get it all, but trust me, it all really does fit together. And even if you don't always understand what you're looking at, hey, the Hans Zimmer music, that's usually enough to keep you interested. Dreams can be kind of loopy sometimes and heavily symbolic, and you don't always understand what's going on when you're in them. That was certainly the case for the prophet Daniel in his book. Daniel has a few truly wacky dreams and visions throughout his story. They involve ferocious beasts, a goat having a showdown with a ram, and a statue made of many types of metals. And these dreams are hard to understand, and they cause many Christians to just kind of read past them as quickly as possible and then move on to the next chapter. But these dreams are not just the side effects of eating that leftover Chinese food. Daniel's dreams were from God. They had real-world predictive power, and the details that Daniel saw in his dreams were specific to things to come. And some of these things that he dreamed about actually have happened. There's other things he dreamed about that haven't happened yet. And so we're going to dig into Daniel's dreams in chapters 2, 7, and 8 of his book, and I'll explain what they mean today. And just like trying to understand Inception, we're going to do that by taking things nice and slow, understanding one piece at a time, and then putting all these pieces together, maybe with a little bit of help from Leonardo DiCaprio. So if you've ever found Daniel's dreams kind of weird and would like to know why they're in the Bible, then turn with me to Daniel 7 and let's get weird. Welcome to Weird Stuff in the Bible, where we explore scripture passages that are bizarre, perplexing, or just plain weird. This is Luke Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about Daniel's wacky dreams, how they accurately predicted the past, and why we can trust what they're telling us about the future. I imagine many a pastor has decided to do a sermon series on the book of Daniel, because it's just full of all these epic stories. Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Nebuchadnezzar being essentially turned into a wild animal for 7 years, and the handwriting on the wall. Who can forget that? And if it weren't for the book of Daniel, we wouldn't have so many great American classic songs, like Dare to Be a Daniel by Philip Bliss, Belteshazzar by Johnny Cash, or I Work Real Hard at the Chocolate Factory by Bob the Tomato. And so it's understandable why many pastors have wanted to do a sermon series on the book. It provides weeks of material. And yet I've observed that many of them flail and flounder when they get to the second half of the book, and you get into all these puzzling dreams and visions. Many pastors don't know what to do with them. But don't worry, I do, or else I wouldn't be recording this episode today. So we're going to look at chapters 2, 7, and 8 in this episode, and let's start with Daniel 7. This book takes place during that time that the Israelites had been conquered by Babylon, and of the Israelites who did not die in that invasion, most of them were taken captive to Babylon. Daniel was one of these captives, but he had shown himself to be so faithful, so dependable, that he was heavily promoted to a prominent place in the kingdom. And so this time period that the book of Daniel is taking place, this is when Babylon ruled the world, the known world at that time. Babylon's modern identity would be Iraq. But Iraq's borders today, they do not represent what Babylon had back then. The Babylonians had conquered the entire Middle East region, and their power was growing. They had what I would call a world empire. Now, it didn't literally cover the whole world, but they were so powerful that if you looked at any other nation back then, it was like a tick in comparison to Babylon's might. Other nations in history that we might consider world empires could include Egypt or Assyria, but Babylon, this was truly something like no other. And so let's begin Daniel's dream now in chapter 7. Daniel 7 verses 1 and 2. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Inception says, dreams feel real while we're in them. It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. And that might be true in normal dreams, but this is a spiritual dream. This is a vision that's being placed by God into Daniel's head as he was sleeping that night, and Daniel's going to know this is no ordinary nightmare. So here's what he sees, verses 3 and 4. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. That right there, that's so strange, right? Like, what could that possibly mean? Well, the meaning is actually pretty simple. Daniel is going to see various animals and beasts in this dream, and each of these animals is going to represent a great nation who will try to take over the world. The first one up right here is Babylon. Now, how do I know it represents Babylon? Well, the lion was the mascot of Babylon, specifically a winged lion. I can't show you this because this is an audio-only podcast, but if you look up ancient Babylonian architecture, you're going to see a lot of winged lions adorning their walls and even in some of their statues. The lion's wings were plucked off, and it was made to stand like a man, and it was given a man's mind. Well, this references the leader of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. As I mentioned before, he was cursed to live as a wild animal for 7 years. This story is told in Daniel chapter 4, and it's an incredible lesson about pride. It's about how God can humble us. So that animal, what's happening in this story, that represents him. So the first beast that Daniel sees in his dream is a winged lion. This is a picture of Babylon. Next is Daniel 7:5. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So this beast represented another empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, which was led by King Cyrus. It was called this because it was an alliance of the Medes and the Persians. They were the next world empire after Babylon, and they conquered Babylon in 539 BC. And it was represented as a bear that was much larger on one side than on the other, and this is because the Persian side was much larger than the Mede side in the Medo-Persian Empire. And the bear had 3 ribs in its mouth, and I believe this was referring to the 3 previous world empires that the Medes and the Persians swallowed up to create their world empire, and that would include Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. But why was it a bear? Well, the animals that Daniel sees in his dream, they seem to relate to how quickly these empires conquered the world. Babylon did it much faster, so it was a winged lion. The Medo-Persian Empire was much less majestic and swift, and it was a deformed bear instead of a lion. But of course, none of these empires conquered the world as speedily as the next one in Daniel 7:6. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So this beast referred to Greece and Alexander the Great, who was leading their conquest. He was a leopard because Alexander the Great conquered the world seriously in the span of about a decade. He defeated the Persian Empire in 333 BC, and so the wings speak to the swiftness of this creature. Alexander the Great was an amazing individual. He was trained by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He died at the young age of 33, and yet by that point, he had brought the world to its knees before him. It is said that he flung himself onto his bed in tears not long before he died because he had no more worlds left to conquer. But what about the 4 heads? Well, that's probably the strangest part of this verse. I mean, a 4-headed leopard, but this is because Alexander the Great had 4 generals. They were Seleucus, Philip, Ptolemy, and Antigonus. And after he died, the Greek Empire was divided up amongst these 4 generals, and each of the 4 and their ancestors reigned over a different division of that empire. And so after this, Daniel dreams of one more empire, Daniel 7, verses 7 and 8. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So what Daniel sees here is this 4th beast. This is the Roman Empire. It doesn't say what kind of animal it was. I always kind of imagined it like a T-Rex or something, okay? It's a ferocious beast. He didn't have a word for it. And this gets a little bit into eschatology because it seems that not everything has been fulfilled yet in regard to the Roman Empire that he sees here. So Greece, they took control in 333 BC, but then they were conquered by the Romans in 146 BC, and the Romans continued to rule for hundreds of years. However, the Roman Empire was never conquered by another world empire. It essentially collapsed, and many Bible scholars believe that the empire of the Antichrist in the end times is going to be a revived Roman Empire. And this is the 10-horned beast, because the Antichrist is going to have 10 divisions in his empire led by 10 kings. The little horn that comes up amongst them, he is the Antichrist himself. And it said that he was speaking great things. One of the signifying characteristics of the Antichrist is his big mouth. And there's some more information that we learn here about the Antichrist. I would really like to share it with you today, but I don't think I'm going to have time. So I'm going to have it in this weekend's newsletter. If you would like to get that, scroll down in the show notes for today's episode, and you can find the link to sign yourself up for my newsletter. All you got to do is put in your email, and what you will receive are just little additional tidbits and expansions on the episodes that I send out each week. If you don't like them, you can unsubscribe at any time, but there's a link in the show notes if you'd like to get on the list. And so we'll be talking about some of the details of the Antichrist from Daniel chapter 7 on this week's newsletter. Let's go on to the next chapter. Daniel 8 is not technically a dream. This one is a vision. The only difference really is that Daniel is awake whenever he receives the information this time. And so God gives him another vision of the future, a vision of future kingdoms, and about the rule of the Antichrist. So Daniel 8, verses 3 and 4, they say, I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. Well, this ram right here, this is the Medo-Persian Empire. Remember earlier, this was the bear in Daniel's other dream, and one side was bigger than the other. And that's represented here by a ram with 2 horns, and it said one is higher than the other. The higher one represents the Persians, the smaller horn represents the Medes. Now, if you remember the Medo-Persian Empire, they were defeated by Alexander the Great's Greek military. And here's how that happened. It happened. It's depicted in verses 5 through 7. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. So this goat comes along and defeats the ram. The goat is the Greek Empire, and its horn is Alexander the Great. So this is depicting the Greek army's might. They totally trampled the Medes and the Persians. But remember, Alexander didn't live that long, and so he had 4 generals who took over his kingdom after he died. Daniel 8:8. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. And so the generals that, like we said before, they divided up Alexander's territory. Now the Greek territory was humongous. That's why the Greek language is so pervasive in history. Like they conquered and they took over so much. And when they took people over, they said, you are going to adopt our Greek culture. That was a practice called Hellenization. And they said, you're going to speak our language, follow our gods. When they took over, they took over your life. They were so good at that even when the Romans conquered them centuries later, the Greeks had been so adept at enforcing their culture on everyone that the Roman Empire's language was still Greek. And many of the people of the Roman Empire still worship Greek gods like Zeus. And so it is my belief that the Antichrist someday, he's going to originate somewhere from the territory of the Greek Empire. And part of why I believe that is because of where Daniel's visions go from here. I'm not going to have time to connect Daniel 8 and chapter 11 today. Daniel 11 is an amazing chapter. It's the most specific chapter on prophecy in the entire Bible, and it also gives a lot of great info on the Antichrist. But for today, I want to just stick to some of the dreams, and let's look at one more dream, And this one's going to connect a bit more with chapter 7. So remember, the 4 creatures that Daniel sees in his dream in chapter 7, those are 4 world empires: Babylon, the Persian or the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks, and the Romans. And of course, I believe that when you put Daniel side by side with Revelation, you also can put together a lot of great end times prophecies that come right out of Daniel and his dreams, and they relate to the revived Roman Empire of the Antichrists and the Antichrist. And so Daniel's dreams here, they have meaning, and the details in these dreams, they do matter. Okay, some Bible teachers will say, don't focus on the details, just try to get the big picture. Well, we get the big picture by focusing on the details. We put these pieces of the vision together, one small piece at a time, and it all comes into a collective whole once you get to the end if you understand all the pieces. And so, again, this is from God. This is not because he ate that expired granola bar that he found at the back of the cupboard and now he's got food poisoning and he's having all kinds of wacky dreams and visions. No, the details of these dreams, they do correspond to reality. So we can look back now and we can understand, oh yeah, the lion in that dream, that was Babylon, and the bear was the Persians, and the 4-headed leopard, that was clearly the Greeks. But remember, for Daniel, this was all future. Okay, he could not have known these other empires were coming. This was God right here telling him about things to come. And Daniel wasn't the only one that God told. There's another dream in the 2nd chapter of this book, and it's a dream of a great statue. In this one, Daniel did not have the dream. King Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. Daniel was able to interpret it for the king. And so let's look at that one next. We're going to start in Daniel 2:37. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he had a dream of a statue. There was a gold head. It had a chest and arms of silver, a belly and thighs of bronze. It had legs of iron, and then the feet were iron mixed with clay. And at the end of the dream, a great stone struck the statue and knocked it all down. And so most Bible readers, they're going to come across all these things, and they're going to be like, what do I even do with this information? So let me help you out with that today. Daniel 2:37 through 38. You, O king, the king of kings, this is Daniel speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Okay, that was kind of a long preamble there to get to the point, but Daniel is telling King Nebuchadnezzar, this statue right here, you are the head of gold. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, they are the top of this statue. And then the dream goes on and he starts going from the top of the statue, scanning it to the bottom. So verse 39, another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. So the pieces of the statue here correspond to kingdoms, kind of similar to the pattern with the beasts in Daniel 7. So the chest, the silver chest, and the arms, these represent the Medo-Persian Empire. That's probably why there's 2 arms, because there's 2 arms of this empire. And then after the Medes and the Persians is the kingdom of bronze, and this would be Greece. This is the kingdom of Alexander the Great. And if you remember who comes after the Greeks, verse 40, and there shall be a 4th kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. So this right here is speaking of the Roman Empire. It steamrolled over everything else. And so Daniel, again, he's living in the 6th century BC, okay? Yet he is able to receive all these prophecies about the next several hundred years of what is going to happen, earth-shaking events in world history. Like, this is the same stuff that you might have learned about in a world history class in high school or maybe in college. How the Babylonians and then the Persians and then the Greeks and then the Romans, how they all had their day in the limelight. These empires, they would rise and fall. And you maybe learned these things in school, but did you ever know that they were prophesied about in the Bible before they even happened? Daniel foresaw all these things to such a great degree. Non-Christians who do an analysis of Daniel, they conclude like he must have lived hundreds of years later and he must have written about all these things after they happened, because nobody could have predicted all this stuff with such specificity. But of course, if you believe in God, then there's nothing impossible about this, because God knows the future and he told it to Daniel in advance. So it might be world history for us, but it was all future for Daniel. And that's not all that Daniel saw. He saw our future as well. Daniel 2:41 through 43. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. So Daniel, interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel told us about the revived Roman Empire of the Antichrist. It's a sort of a Roman Empire. That's why it's got the iron mixed in. But it's also made up of clay. It said it was a mixture. And if we really wanted to go down a rabbit hole here, we could mention how some connect this idea of a mixture to the Nephilim, and because they were a mixture, and that perhaps we could see another event similar to the Nephilim creation in the last days, especially because Jesus said that the last days would be like the days of Noah. So maybe we could look into that in a future episode someday and dig into that question. I don't have time for it this time, but hey, there's a lot of things in the dreams of the book of Daniel that sound so strange, so confusing. But like I said, if you just put them together one piece at a time, the whole picture starts to become pretty clear. I think the hard part is doing all this research just to find one piece at a time. As it was said by the great con artist Frank Abagnale, played by Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, people only know what you tell them. And so if you don't know about world history, if you don't know about Babylon and Greece and all that, a lot of these details are going to go over your head as you read the Bible. And so that's why I recommend getting a hold of a great commentary that explains all this whenever you're trying to study out Daniel. My favorite one is the Walvoord Prophecy Commentary Series. That's by John Walvoord. He's passed away now, but he wrote this stuff, I think like in the 40s or 50s, wrote these things. And he's got 4 volumes out on Daniel, Revelation, Thessalonians, and one on Matthew. And there's even updated notes for today with some notes from Mark Hitchcock and Charles Dyer. These are so helpful, so I recommend those if you ever want to dig some more into Daniel's wacky dreams. The next time on this podcast, I am planning an episode about the common practice of casting lots in the Bible. This is a method that people in the scriptures would use to ascertain God's will, to find out what God wanted them to do. And the crazy thing about it was that it worked. And so that could cause us to wonder, should we be casting lots to determine God's will? Well, I'm going to get into that next week and make sure that you're subscribed so you can get it. But let's go ahead and wrap up for today. So Daniel's dreams, they tell us a lot about the future, and not just his future, but our future as well. It tells us about this man who's coming, known as the Antichrist. He's usually described as a horn in Daniel, a horn with a big mouth. He loves to brag on himself. Every time the Antichrist comes up in the Bible, his boastful mouth is emphasized. His chief characteristic is pride. He's going to think that he's unstoppable. He'll probably be quoting Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Titanic. He'll say, "I'm king of the world." But not only is his big mouth included every time the Antichrist comes up, but it also always includes his defeat by King Jesus. And so Daniel 2's dream of the statue ends in this way. A stone strikes the feet of the statue and knocks it all down. Daniel 2:34 and 35. A stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And that is the kingdom of Jesus right there. It is someday going to replace all the kingdoms of the world. He strikes the feet of the statue, that kingdom of the Antichrist, and the kingdom of Jesus stands supreme forever. It's talking about the second coming of Christ right there. Before he even came the first time, it's telling us right here about when he's going to come that second time. And here is what he's going to do to the Antichrist in that dream from Daniel 7, verses 25 and 26. He shall speak words against the Most High. This is talking about the Antichrist right here. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times in the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. This confuses some Christians. They say, Wait, the saints are going to be given into the hand of the Antichrist? Like, what about God's protection? Well, I'm going to explain all that in the newsletter this weekend. So again, make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already subscribed. But here's what's going to happen to the Antichrist when Jesus shows up. Verse 26, but the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. You can also read about it in Revelation 19. The Antichrist is the first individual who is going to be picked up and thrown into the lake of fire at the second coming of Christ. The Antichrist kingdom will not last. A statue made with feet of clay is not going to hold up that long, especially when Jesus is coming. We might put it this way. Just like one of Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriends, the kingdom of the Antichrist is going to be on the younger side. But the kingdom of Jesus, that's going to last forever and ever. The Bible's not weird for giving us dreams and visions. We are weird whenever we won't take the time to understand one piece at a time and then put those pieces together. And that's exactly what we did today. So thanks for listening. God bless you for sticking around all the way to the end. And we'll see you next time on Weird Stuff in the Bible.